Hi, it's Katrina. My friend David is going to be helping me out with the voiceover today, so I hope you enjoy.
Number 10. The Beheading of John the Baptist. The beheading of John the Baptist was one of the most gruesome actions of the Bible. In the New Testament, John the Baptist was imprisoned by King Herod of Galilee during the days the Holy Land was under Roman Empire control. He was imprisoned because he was outspoken about Herod divorcing his wife and then hooking up with his sister-in-law, Herodias. What's truly interesting about this story is that it's told in great detail in the New Testament by Jewish historian Josephus. Modern historians believe this was a real event and that it likely happened just as described in the Bible. John was imprisoned, and then Herod had him killed at the behest of his brother's ex-wife and his new bride, Herodias. However, it wasn't just his killing that was gruesome, it was the way it happened. The whole affair likely went down around the year 28 AD, following a feast at the fortress of Machaerus. It was Herod's birthday, and Herodias' daughter asked what Herod would give her as a present. Herod said he would give her anything, but it was all a ploy. The birthday girl then asked for John the Baptist's head. This was all part of her mother's plan, and so the king had no choice but to chop off his prisoner's head and present it to the girl on a silver platter. Number 9. The 10 Plagues of Egypt. In the book of Exodus, the Israelites were being kept prisoner by the Pharaoh of Egypt. God wanted the Hebrew slaves to be released so that they could return to the land of their forefathers. God figured the best way to convince the Egyptians that he was in charge was by unleashing 10 terrible plagues. First came the plague of blood, with the Nile River being turned into sticky, gooey blood that stank like death and was unable to be consumed. Then frogs started jumping out of the bloody Nile River, invading people's houses and causing general froggy chaos. Next, gnats were sent to plague Egypt, and then swarms of flies. God said that the houses of the Egyptians will be full of flies, and even the ground will be covered by them. And it just gets worse from here. Next came the pestilence of livestock, and then the Egyptian people and their animals were covered in boils. They had to undergo the worst hailstorm that had ever befallen Egypt, and the sky shook with thunder. Locusts were released into the country and allowed to devour everything in sight, leaving the Egyptians without a scrap of food. The Lord then said that darkness will spread across the sky, and he blotted out the sun for 3 full days. Lastly, the angel of death was sent to take away the firstborn son of every Egyptian family, including the cattle. The plagues were barbaric and horrifying, and many people died in the story, but in the end the Pharaoh finally relented and allowed the Hebrews to leave. It was only after he freed them that he changed his mind and tried to get them back. This was when Moses parted the Red Sea, and the Pharaoh's army drowned trying to chase them. Number 8. The Suffering of Job. Job suffers a lot in the Bible, more than most. He becomes the unwitting victim of a bet between God and Satan. Job was a good and decent God-fearing man, considered one of the most devout followers in the land. Satan argued that Job only worshipped God because he lived an easy life. Satan said that if God took away all Job's belongings and struck down his children, he would stray away from the path of goodness. This was a bet God knew he could win, but Job didn't have the slightest clue what was going on. Job had his flock stolen, his property was taken, and his children were all crushed when his house collapsed. Still, Job refused to curse the name of God. Satan then started torturing Job. He covered his body with boils and sores, causing Job immense agony. However, through all of the tribulations, Job never denounced God. Where this story gets truly horrible is that God never gave an explanation for why he would kill Job's family and make his life miserable just to win a bet with the devil. It seems unnecessarily cruel. Even though God did bestow Job with more children to replace the ones he lost, that couldn't have possibly taken away the devastation of losing the first batch. He already lost his original 3 daughters and 7 sons, plus his wife had to give birth to another 10 children. Number 7. Slaying the Canaanites. The book of Joshua details what most religious scholars believe was the genocide ordered to be carried out by God himself. It happened after God called forth his people from Egypt back to the land of their ancestors. But at that time, the Canaanite civilization occupied the land of Israel. And so God demanded that every man, woman, and child living wrongfully in Israel be mercilessly slaughtered. The Israelites then carried out God's command and went from city to city, destroying every last person in the ancient kingdom of Canaan. This particular story does not sit well with a lot of people for one main reason. God appears to order the indiscriminate bloodshed of innocents, a sort of ethnic cleansing to allow the Israelites free access to their lands. This wasn't really something God was known for doing in the Bible. He was often depicted as callous and unwavering, but not a senseless murderer. One of the ways Christians have defended the genocide of the Canaanite people is that they say the Canaanites were sinful monsters. We see their sinful ways mentioned a few times in the Bible. The Canaanites were supposedly morally depraved, intimate with everything from their own siblings to their own livestock. They were said to have bathed themselves in the blood of innocents and sacrificed children to their pagan gods. And so, by this reasoning, God didn't order an innocent genocide. He was wiping the earth clean of a clan of monsters. Number 6. Sodom and Gomorrah. When it came to God's fury, the Canaanites were not the only ones who suffered. In the book of Genesis, we learn of two cities, Sodom and Gomorrah. These cities were thick with sin, wicked to their very cores, and were mentioned in most biblical texts from the Old Testament to the Quran. In the story from Genesis, God is presented as a reasonable, omnipotent being. Abraham was afraid God would destroy the innocents along with the wicked, and so he asked God what he would do if there were even 50 righteous people found between the two cities. God said that he would spare Sodom and Gomorrah if he could find some goodness within the cities, but unfortunately, he didn't find much. He couldn't even find 10 righteous people, and only discovered one good man named Lot, his nephew, and his family. And so God did exactly what he promised he would do. He destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah by sulfur and fire. As the angels carried Lot's family to safety, Lot's wife looked back at the city and was consequently turned into a pillar of salt. Which of the 10 plagues do you think would be the most devastating if it happened today? Let us know in the comments, and while you're at it, hit that subscribe button. Number 5. Biblical cannibalism. There are a lot of references to cannibalism in the Bible, and nobody is really sure why. There is no specific cannibalistic villain, but there are a lot of passages talking about people eating other people. Psalm 27:2 says, "When evildoers eat up my flesh, it is they who stumble and fall." In Micah, there's a passage that says the Israelite leaders don't care for their people, and that they skin them alive, chop them up, and use their meat in the cooking pot. Even Jesus told people that they needed to eat his flesh and drink his blood, and in Leviticus, God warns the Israelites that if they disobey his commands, they'll be forced to eat the flesh of their own sons and daughters. There's a similar passage in Jeremiah when a prophet says Jerusalem will be attacked, and those trapped inside will eat their friends, and of course, their children too. It's clear the writers of the Bible had a serious fascination with cannibalism. It can be found everywhere, suggesting the act of eating one's friends and family in desperate times may have been a little more commonplace than anyone thought. Number 4. The Mysterious Hand. One of the stories in the Bible is of the great king Belshazzar, last crowned ruler of the Neo-Babylonian Empire until his death at the hands of the Persians in 539 BC. The biblical story takes place at a banquet thrown by the king for his nobles and the powerful people of Babylonian society. He commands that the goblets that were stolen from the Temple of Jerusalem be brought to the feast so that he and his concubines can drink from them. As the king and his concubines laugh and drink the wine, they praise the gods of gold and silver. As they praise these false idols, a mysterious human hand appears out of nowhere. The hand has no body, and it crawls along the wall and leaves a written warning on the plaster. Only King Belshazzar can see the writing on the wall, but he can't understand it. He has to summon Daniel, who can speak Aramaic, to read the warning for him. The message translates to, "Numbered, numbered, weighed, divided." This means the king's days are numbered, his soul has been weighed and found impure, and his kingdom will be divided. That night the king is killed in his sleep. The Persians take Babylon, and the empire falls. It's from this story that we get the expression, writing on the wall. Number 3. A legion of demons. There is an exorcism in the Bible performed by none other than Jesus Christ himself, and the details can be found in the book of Matthew. Jesus was moving through the region of Gadarenes when he came across a pair of men that were so hopelessly possessed by demons that they had turned into violent monsters. Nobody could continue on the trail because the men were crazed and raving mad. But, of course, Jesus wasn't worried at all. He approached the possessed individuals, drove the demons out of their bodies, and sent the demons into a herd of pigs. Each man had been possessed by their own legion of demons, and so Jesus easily yanked each one out and threw it into its own pig. Then he sent the whole herd of pigs tumbling down the embankment of a lake where they splashed into the water and drowned. The men were saved, the pigs were all dead, and the demonic entities were sent back to hell, where they belonged. Number 2. The Amalekites. The Amalekites were a nomadic desert tribe that most likely lived between Egypt and Canaan in what we now call the Negev Desert. This mysterious tribe had different names. They were called Sut by the Babylonians and Situ by the Egyptians. According to the Bible, the tribe was unrelentingly brutal. They hated the Israelites with a passion, and in Deuteronomy we see how they attacked the Israelites as they fled Egypt. When the Israelites were weary and exhausted, the desert tribe invaded them and tried to crush them. The Bible goes on to say that the Amalekite tribe joined forces with the child-sacrificing, blood-drinking Canaanites to try and defeat the Israelites once and for all. They were constantly attacking Israel, disrupting their food supply and destroying their land. And so, yet again, God orders a genocide. He tells King Saul to attack the Amalekites and utterly destroy them for their trespasses. God specifically says to kill the men, women, children, and even the infants. He says every last cow, sheep, camel, and donkey needs to be obliterated. However, King Saul failed to obey God's commands. He slayed a lot of people, but he allowed the Amalekites' king, Agag, to live. The Amalekites continued to bother the Israelites up until they were destroyed alongside the Persians and the fabled King Xerxes, as told in the book of Esther. Number 1. The Witch of Endor. The Witch of Endor is one of the more mystical and frightening characters in the Bible. According to the book of Samuel in the Old Testament, the Witch of Endor was a necromancer. She supposedly had a talisman that bestowed her with the power to summon the dead. When Saul, the first ruler of the United Kingdom of Israel, needed help defeating the Philistines in battle, he sought the help of this sorceress. Even though necromancy was considered a crime in ancient Israel, Saul was desperate for any advice he could get for destroying his enemies. He first tried to consult God, but he didn't receive an answer, and so, pressed for options, he summoned the witch. Saul was hoping to summon the spirit of the prophet Samuel. Saul believed that if he could only speak with the prophet's spirit, he could be given a prophecy of the future, and therefore know how to win his great battle. But unfortunately, this did not go well for Saul. Rather than be given information that could help his conquest, he was given a prophecy of doom. The spirit of Samuel told Saul that his army would be defeated and that he and his sons would be dead by the next day. Saul collapsed out of sheer terror, the witch was sent away, and the next day came. Saul's Israelite army was defeated just as prophesied. Saul was wounded and he ended up falling on his own sword. It was a last desperate move to escape the shame of what he had done by seeking the help of a known necromancer. What's your favorite terrifying story from the Bible? Let us know in the comments and don't forget to subscribe. Thanks for watching and we'll see you next time. Bye.